Welcome to the Pleistocene Climate Change Project. This semester we'll be endeavoring to reconstruct past climates and look at how current climates are changing to try to figure out how we might think about predicting future climates. It's such a big buzz, all this issue about climate change, and there are so many different perspectives based upon computer programs, based upon different conjectures from different groups. And the interesting thing about climate is that it's been around for a very long time, and it's left a record on this planet. That is, the systems of the planet have been dealing with climate change, maybe even causing climate changes, for a very, very long time. So we have a long history of things we can look at to see how climates have changed in the past to give us more perspective on our future climate changes. And maybe by doing this, if we approach it from a way that thinks outside the box, we might be able to come up with some unique ways of approaching this that no one's thought of, and maybe will give us some insight that will help us to consider this a little more reasonable. Anyhow, we'll be doing some phenological studies on plants and terrestrial communities, but where we'll really go deep is in the marine systems. And by deep, I don't mean so much deep like way out there in the ocean, but more like deep time. It turns out the marine systems have recorded climate changes for a very long time in very great detail and given us lots and lots of evidence to look at that might help us to reconstruct future climates. For example, you might look into the distance here and you can see these sort of flat rocks that I'm standing on. It's a little bit of a low tide, and the waves, as you can kind of see, are actually beating these rocks and cutting them back and making this flat surface. But you might also notice that there is this cliff in the background that they're running up against. And what's happening is the waves are cutting in and cutting this cliff back over time. And this flat spot's called a marine terrace. When the ocean's at a particular level, it cuts a big marine terrace. Now, what's really surprising, might be surprising to you if I turn around like this, if I do this without falling down, you can see over in the distance that marine terrace, that flat thing, is actually pretty high. It's higher than current wave-cut platforms. And you might notice that it's kind of weird shapes. It's got all these lines in it. And those lines, like the lines right down here that I'm standing on, are a series of sediments that have been laid down. In geology, there's a rule called the original horizontality, which means all of these layers were originally flat. And now, you can kind of see in the background here, they've been tipped up. And that means that these things have undergone some sort of a tectonic process, which has let them become sort of tipped at an angle. And that happened a long time ago. These are Miocene sediments, maybe 6 million years old. And then they were tipped up and then eroded off on these flat benches. Now, if you look at the beach cliff behind me, you might notice that up here there are these sort of flat layers, right? These things are laid down completely flat. They're not tipped, and they're right above this tipped sediment below. So what's happened then is in the distant past, those sediments were laid down and in a sort of flat layered stacked event, but it all happened when sea level was much higher. Or maybe it happened when this was much lower. And actually, it turns out a combination of the two. That is, this area, like most of the state of California, is moving up. Tectonically, there are forces that cause uplift. And sea level has been going up and down over the past 1.2 million years, and probably much longer than that, in a very regular basis. So what happens is you get this really complex set of pictures here. One of the projects we're going to be working on is to look at fossils in cliffs like this from past events when sea level was high, when the climate was warm, and see if we can reconstruct how that might give us some information about today and maybe even the future. You might notice a big peak way in the background, and I hiked up there a little earlier today to get a perspective on these marine terraces in this area. And so in a little video clip, aside from this one, you can check to see, well, how many of these different events have occurred in this area by looking at how many marine terraces and their relative positions. Anyways, this should be a very interesting project. You're going to get to sample a marine terrace like this, but one with more fossils in Santa Barbara. This one's right now. I'm just south of Morro Bay in a fabulous state park near Spooner Cove. Anyways, I'll walk over maybe and we'll take a look at that sedimentary cliff.